I don't like student leadership teams. I don't like this fill out an application and somebody's in and somebody's out and then mom and dad are angry. I don't like 12 kids on a team and it's kind of like the Last Supper. We all sit around together and, because what ends up happening, to be totally honest with you, is we usually put juniors and seniors who are really busy and already overwhelmed, right? And they start the fall strong on the student leadership team, but by Christmas, we can't find them. They're applying to colleges, right. They're doing college visits, and it's a disaster. And typically on those teams, and I've observed a lot of teams, there's 3 students that do everything and the other 9 hide. And
it's like the worst group project ever.
Right. It's horrible. And it's usually just project based. Again, the doing side of leadership.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever you are and wherever this finds you. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. Make sure you're subscribed and following where you listen. If you've not left a rating or review recently or ever, I'd love for you to do that. It helps others find the show. Make sure that the show continues to reach and encourage youth pastors. Hopefully you're on the mailing list over at thelongerhaul.com and in the Facebook group, but if not, make sure you jump into those as well. Listen, we've got a great episode today, and I've told a couple folks since recording the interview about this conversation today. Every now and then, you record an episode or an interview with somebody and you just walk away feeling like, man, I could have talked to them all day long. And that's true today. We're jumping into the topic of student leadership, which is a really important topic in student ministry. I think most youth pastors know that we want to have student leaders in student leadership, but we're not quite sure what to do with it, or we haven't really found a way that we love to do. And so Doug Franklin jumps on today from Leader Treks. And if you've not met Doug or been around Doug, just an amazing guy, has done youth ministry forever and loves student pastors, youth ministers, youth leaders, loves student leadership, and has a lot to share and say about that topic. You're going to hear his heart for sure come out as he talks about this, but just some really, really practical helps and takeaways, as well as some great resources for you today. So I know you're going to enjoy the conversation. I know you're going to love Doug, just an amazing guy, and just so thankful for him to give some time to jump on to the show today. All of the links, resources that we mentioned, and there are quite a few, you can find on the show notes page over at thelongerhaul.com/episode 140. So longerhaul.com/episode 140. So make sure you head over there and check out all of those things. So anyway, hopefully you got a pen and paper ready. There's going to be a lot of things I think that you're going to want to make note of. If you're driving, don't do that while you're driving. But hopefully, either way, you'll come away with some really strong takeaways. And I think this is really going to help you strengthen your students and your student leadership in your context there. So enjoy the interview today. We'll jump in here today with Doug Franklin from Leader Treks.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, here's your host, Jody Livingston.
Well, hey, Doug, thanks for giving some time and jumping on today. I know we've tried to do this a few times, and just my schedule, my health stuff kind of maybe derailed that. So I appreciate you hanging in and jumping in. I'm really excited to jump in and talk about our topic, particularly when it comes to just student leadership. In fact, I just mentioned right before we jumped on, I think everybody realizes it's important, but nobody's really sure how to do it. So yep. I'm excited to have you kind of come in and teach us. I'm excited to learn today. I know I'll be taking a ton of notes on my side. Before we get to that, maybe just take a second for folks who may not be familiar with you, introduce yourself, kind of your journey a little bit, what you do, and why you would even be the one to talk on this.
I started at Leader Treks in 1994. And so I started as a youth worker in 87. That's a long time ago, man. A long time ago. And talk about the long haul. I came out of college. I studied youth ministry, but I didn't really want to be a youth worker, youth pastor. Let me say it that way. So I got a job, and my church invited me to come and volunteer, and I gave all the excuses. And then they had this one argument that I couldn't fort, which was, you owe us. And I did. I had grown up in a great church, great youth workers, great volunteers, great small groups. I did. I owed them. So I said, how much do I owe you? That was how arrogant I was as a 22-year-old. And they're like, 1 year. And so I was like, I could do 1 year. So I did 1 year. I played WrestleMania with my junior high boys. I put a square down in masking tape on the floor. And I said, every week, I said, get me out of this square and you win. And it was WrestleMania. And then I did 5 minutes of Jesus at the end. You know, it was terrible. It was the worst youth ministry in the world. And I remember near the end of the year, one of the other volunteers, Chuck, said to me, Doug, are you gonna come back next year? And I said, no, Chuck, I just had to do 1 year. I got my 1 year done. Chuck said this to me. He's like, why don't you start asking the boys in your group if they know Jesus as their Lord and Savior? And I'm like, Chuck, I grew up in Wheaton, Illinois. I'm like, every kid in my group's dad was a professor at Wheaton College, you know, and I was like Christian school. And I was like, okay, Chuck, make you happy, I'll do it, you know. So at the end, I was like, boys, anybody want to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior? 2 boys raised their hands, and I literally said this:
wow.
You got to be kidding me! You got to be kidding me! I was a great evangelist. Greg Steer could learn so much from me, and so
awesome.
But I was hooked then. That hooked me, and it wasn't long before I got rid of the square and got the Bible in there, and we started going to town. And so that's what really captured my heart. And 6 years later, I left the secular world and I became a full-time youth worker. But one of the things that I noticed in youth ministry is every time I set the bar, my students would jump over it. So I started playing with it, and I started requiring more and offering more and, you know, asking for more, and they just kept jumping over and over and over. And I was like, how high can I get this thing? And then I realized my students loved owning it. They loved being in charge. They loved making decisions. So I started looking for leadership development resources. And there's only one at the time, Youth Specialty. So I called them. They were super nice. They were like, that's interesting. I'm not really sure that's part of youth ministry. And that was a fair answer. I'm not blaming. That's a fair answer, right? And God began to lay on my heart, like, hey, Doug, why don't you start making resources for youth workers? So I did. I started making resources. And it wasn't long before I started asking myself the question, how would I teach leadership development if I wanted to teach it to somebody else? Would I stand in front of a whiteboard? And the answer was no for me. The answer was I'd teach it through a vehicle that youth workers were already using. So I started offering these leadership development mission trips where I took a missions trip and I took every aspect of the trip and I turned it into a leadership laboratory. And from there, I really began to learn a lot about leadership. And then I quickly learned that if you're going to do leadership development, you need this element of discovering how you're wired, how you're shaped, how you're gifted. And so I partnered with a guy named Dr. Jim Galvin, who at the time was the leading expert on leadership development assessments. And he and I wrote 7 together in students' language, biblically based, really great. And then from there, I started putting them into curriculum. And then in the early 2000s, Cru came along, Campus Crusade came along and asked me to start training their staff in Latin America. And I was like, dude, I'm a kid guy. I don't go to Latin America. First of all, so they just begged me to come to Bolivia and do some training for them. And so I did. And I didn't really have my material in training form. So it was a challenge for me. Made a lot of mistakes. And but they were so impressed with what they saw. They signed a 10-year contract with us to license the name and for me to travel to Bolivia twice a year to train their top-end staff. This wasn't just college kids because they wanted to get into private universities and they couldn't with the name Campus Crusade, but they could with the name Leader Treks and offering leadership development. So they saw a lot of university students come to know the Lord. And so even today, they still do training every week in Cuba, Leader Treks training. That's still all over Latin America. They even signed a contract with the Ecuadorian Navy to do leadership development. development with leader treks.
Wow.
Now, the first thing I said is Ecuador has a Navy. That was the first thing I said. But it spread that way. And that helped me because I went from thinking about how do I do leadership development with the student in front of me to how do I train somebody else to do leadership development. And that was transformational for me. And it's one of those things that I think God brought into my life to help me grow. So today, Leader Treks does trips, training, and curriculum. We still offer mission trips. We still do about 100 and little over 100 mission trips a year. We still we do training all over the country. I was just in Colorado Springs last week training youth workers through our refuel events. And then, of course, curriculum, which thousands of churches across the U.S. use us for curriculum. So for both discipleship and leadership development. So that's my journey kind of in a nutshell.
I love that. And I love that it's not like what I hear you saying is that this thing you do is really born out of a passion in your life that God has stirred through your own working with students. And I think in a world today where it's so easy just to create content and curriculum just to have and sell, I think the fact that it's born out of a conviction that was kind of stirred in your own heart as a youth worker early on, man, that's impactful. That's impactful.
And, I'll be honest with you.
I appreciate that.
I kind of dislike it when somebody just buys a piece of curriculum from us because to be honest with you, I feel like it's very transactional. And I feel like leadership development is not you can't buy our big book, Student Leaders Start Here. You can't buy that book and instantly make leaders. It's a process. It involves principles, leadership principles that come from the world and from Scripture, and it requires experiences. They got to play the role of a leader. So it's a process, and I think that's a little bit of what's hard about it. There's no silver bullet in leadership development, and it's messy, and you can't become a leader by just studying it. You actually have to do it, and it's kind of like being a driver's ed teacher. You got to have to get behind the wheel with some students that don't know what they're doing. And, and so, but I think that's why it's costly, but anyhow, it's fun, but it is a process.
So if let's say there's a youth pastor or a youth minister listening and they're at church, they've got, 15, 20 kids maybe, and they're looking at the room and going, gosh, I need to figure out how to start developing these leaders. Like where would you recommend they start? Like where does that look like to start from nothing?
That's great. Because I think that's can I get on my soapbox for a minute maybe? And I think most
we love soapboxes here.
I think most youth workers look at their group and they say, who are my responsible kids? And I'll make them leaders. Who are my juniors and seniors? And I'll make them leaders. I don't think our job is to make responsible kids leaders. I think they pretty much are. I think our job is to take non-leaders and make them leaders. And so, where I would start with that is I would start with students' favorite subject, which is themselves. And I think we value leadership in a lot of ways. The students that I still interact with don't value leadership as much as we do. They value service in a lot of ways, or impact or influence. You can say it a lot of different ways. But I think I would start with their favorite subject because God has made them unique. And I think most students have a sneaky suspicion they're unique, but they can't prove it. Like, because they all dress alike, they talk alike, they go to the same school, right? But they do have a sneaky suspicion that they're unique. And so one of the places I like to start with any student is helping them understand how God has wired them, how God has gifted them. And I tend to find that if I start by talking about leadership, they're really not as interested. But if I start talking about them, and they can discover if they're a doer, thinker, mover, or relator. They can discover if they're relationally based or if they're task oriented. They can discover how they interact in large groups and small groups, and how they can interact when they're bored. That when they start to learn about that, then they start to I see the light bulb go on, and a lot of them are like, Doug, tell me more. This is a fascinating topic you've got me on here. It's myself, right? And as I begin to help them understand themselves, I can then introduce this concept, which I really love, which is burden plus passion plus vision equals mission. I don't want to just tell students these are the giftings and these are the wirings you have. I want to tell them that they're made for something, that God has made them.
Yeah. Will you say that one more time?
Yeah. I want to help them understand this idea that burden, what breaks your heart, passion, what you love to do, and vision, what comes from God, these are the breadcrumbs that equal your mission in life. And I think
that's good.
You know that you've been a youth worker forever. You know, the students come up to you usually in their junior and senior year, and they say to you, where do you think I should go to college? Or what do you think I should do with my life? Or should I get in the military? Or, they ask us these questions, right? And I'm always dumbfounded by that until I started really thinking about what are the breadcrumbs? What are the clues? What are some things that really help students understand what they're made for? And I really came down to its burden, things that really break your heart, things you want to fix in this world, passion, things you want to love to do, and then vision. And vision really comes, Jody, from looking at how God answers your prayers. And that's really, I think God is opening and closing doors and windows and whatever you got. And he's directing us. And if we look at what we're praying for and how he answers our prayer, I put those three things together and I find mission. And what I want students to really know is that mission will be the most fun, satisfying, joyful experience of their life. And I know most students tend to think that life is valuable when you get the biggest car, the biggest house, the biggest bank account, right? But you and I both know that that's not true, right? And they're going to come to understand that. But I want them to come to understand it before 40. I want them to understand it when they can still make choices with their life, like they can still change the trajectory of their life and not be influenced by what the world says, but maybe the way God has created and made them. Because I got to tell you, I think maybe one of the most disappointing things is that when I talk about this and an adult will come up to me and say, Doug, life has just overburdened me. I can't actually change what I'm doing now, even though I know I'm made for something else. I can't change because I got a mortgage. I got all these things going on. I got this job, this career, and I can't do anything, right? So that's what breaks my heart a little bit, is seeing people that are in the wrong spot and they're frustrated by it. They feel like they're not really doing all that they can do and be all that they can be, if you want to use an old Marine commercial. But you know what I mean? But that's what I want. I want our students to know very early on that they're unique. God has made them really special. He loves them. And if I can use an old term, he has a wonderful plan for their life. I don't like evangelicalisms that much, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, he's got a plan to use them. And I think and when you have this perspective, then you don't want to just say only certain kids can be leaders. Now you want to say every kid can be a leader, right? Now we want this experience for every kid. And I think that's why God didn't make some of our students and say, there's no mission for them. He didn't say that, right? He's like, he's got something for everyone. And I want them to understand how he's prepared them.
Do you think that, would you say that some kids are born with more of a tendency towards leadership?
Yeah.
Like more of a natural born leader?
This is a question. I think leadership can be learned, but I do think some people are born with the natural spiritual gift of leadership. I call it the King David gift, right? And there are students that are born with it because we see it listed in the New Testament under gifts that the Holy Spirit gives. So I do believe that. But I also think that leadership is a set what leadership actually is. It's applying a set of principles like focus precedes success, like communication that counts, like problem solving, conflict resolution, navigating obstacles, communicating clearly, compassionately, consistently. I think there are principles that we can apply that will allow us to be good leaders. And I think every student can learn those principles and can apply them depending on the situation. But I do believe that there are some people that are really just gifted by the Holy Spirit to lead. Here's the other thing I believe, if you'll give me a second. I believe that being a leadership mimic will never work for anybody. I don't think I can be John Maxwell. I don't think I could be Andy Stanley or pick any other big name leader. And I think that sometimes when we read their books, we think to ourselves, oh, I'm going to try to do that. And it becomes frustrating for us. It won't work to be a leadership mimic, a leader mimic. You really need to discover who you are. You really need to discover how you're wired, how you're really gifted for ministry. And then here's my line. You got to be okay with it. I meet a lot of leaders that aren't okay with their gifting and their wiring. And they try to be and do something different because they like the way that their hero does it, right? And it becomes a frustration for them. And I think this is where we get into we have a lot of frustrated Christian leaders because they haven't been okay with how they're gifted and how they're wired.
Yeah, that's good. You know what I found? I don't know if you would agree with this, so you're welcome to tell me I'm wrong. But it feels like when I look at the kids who've come through our student ministries over the years, the kids that those naturally gifted leaders, man, they are the troublemakers. Like, they are the punks. they just have this way of pulling and gravitating everybody to them. And I think at some point, I learned to look and go, man, if I can just get that kid running at the right thing, they're going to change the world.
So, when I think about leadership,
I don't know if that's true for everybody.
No, I think that's totally true. And so let me kind of I'm totally with you on this. So I think the first step in leadership development is building a deep relationship with a student and helping them understand how God is using them already. Second thing is doing assessments with them to find out how they're wired, how they're gifted. The third step I see in leadership development is this doing and being side of leadership. Students love the doing side of leadership. They love to do a project. They love to lead the games. They love to do something, right? But it's the being side. Yeah. And the being side is what you're talking about. So I like to teach empathy. And what I mean by empathy is I describe empathy as remaining others focused, caring about what others think and remaining others focused, which I think is the new leadership fad in Christianity today. We went through this time frame where we loved the entrepreneurial leader and take the mountain leader, and then all these pastors started having moral failures. And I live in the Chicagoland area, so I got a couple of big ones right around me here. And now I see pastors being fired for just being mean. Now, Bill Hybels was mean every day, and he was rewarded for it. Right now you be mean, and you're right. So I think empathy is something that we need to teach our students and to help them. Don't hold grudges, don't dominate the conversation. Ask questions of other people. And when I actually sit down with students, I have this chart that I use on empathy, what empathy is and what it isn't. When I sit down and talk to students about this is usually their response, which is surprising to me. It's not, oh, Doug, that's not me. It's usually, Doug, I've never seen this before. What are you talking about? I don't think our students are really taught much about empathy and about being others focused and staying focused on what others need. But it's really interesting when I say to students, hey, what do you think about this type of leadership? And I draw a diamond and I put the leader at the top and they tell everybody what to do. Students go, I hate that kind of leadership. And I would agree. It's command and control, right? I flip it upside down. I put the triangle upside down and I say, what about the leader being down here and serving up to people? Students will say to me in a second, I love that kind of leadership. And I'm like, great, because that's kind of Jesus's style, and that's going to be what we're going to focus on, right?
Yeah.
But when I talk about empathy in relationships, most students go, I don't know what I'm struggling, because think about a student's life. It's half online and it's half in reality. And in the reality part is trying to be something you're not just as much as you are online. It's a little easier online. And I think that they become so self-absorbed that they can't think of other people. So I think one of the best things that we can do with those naturally born leaders is really help them understand the empathy side of being a leader, the being side of being a leader. And I think that's the hardest side to learn. It's been the hardest side for me to learn. I really like the command and control when I'm in command and control.
Yeah, of course. Don't we all? Don't we all?
Yeah. But I think the most powerful leadership I see today, and I think the future of leadership, is really empathy. I think leaders who are empathetic towards others and keep others their focus, I think they'll have huge impact.
What are some consistent mistakes that you see youth workers making when they're trying to do and kind of introduce leadership in their student ministries?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I think some of the things, and I'll just mention a few quickly, but then I'll focus in on one. I think they know that they've got to help students understand what leadership is. And then I think they understand that they need to have students discover how they're wired and how they're gifted. So what they typically do is they define leadership, and then they do some assessments. And then after that, they don't know what to do to move forward. So it's read a book by C.S. Lewis, do John Maxwell's 21 Irrefutable Laws. They tend to stop right there, the development. And I think what most youth workers don't know how to do is they don't know how to set up a experience for students to really get the most out of it. So I'll just explain it a little bit here. What I like to do is I like to think of a training plan once I put a student in a role. So let's say I put a student in the role of, they're going to run all the games at the fall retreat, right? And I've given them that role. Well, then I'm going to put together a training plan. Like, what do they need to know to be able to do that? They need to know how to be able to calculate the people and the resources. They need to be able to know how to engage those students that never want to play a game. They need to know how to sell the game. We as youth workers, that's our greatest strength, selling games, right? We make it like, this lava that you're about to cross is the hottest lava you've ever seen. You know what I mean? They need to learn how to do that. They need to learn how to evaluate the performance. So I create a training plan, and then I walk through on how to do that. Maybe for casting the vision, I have them stand on stage when no students are around in practice, or maybe I take them to Target and we walk the toy aisle and we talk about resources and people that we need. Or I'm going to put together some sort of training plan. Maybe I have them write out all of the rules, whatever it is. But I think that's where youth workers make a lot of mistakes, is they put students in roles and they go, best of luck. And they forget about the training component to this. And then the second part of this, the second thing I see, is that they don't get the experience right. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I think there's three kinds of experiences for student leaders. One is comfort zone. They end up in a comfort zone where they're able to do whatever it is, whatever role, they're able to do it easily in their own strength and ability. I think then there's the growth zone. I think the growth zone is 10% outside of the comfort zone. What exactly does that mean? I have no idea, but that sounded good, didn't it, when I said it, like just 10% outside? It means it's outside of their comfort zone somewhat, right? And then there's the panic zone.
Yeah.
There's the panic zone where they feel overwhelmed and they say these words that they have memorized, I quit, right? They quit very quickly, right? Yeah. So what a youth worker needs to be able to do with a good leadership experience for a student is he or she needs to be able to move them out of the comfort zone, but keep them only in the growth zone and not make it so challenging that it takes them to the panic zone. And this is a mastery. This I've made so many mistakes here, Jody. I could just begin to tell you how many mistakes I've made. But this is the way I define it. Comfort zone, the student has no issue. Failure is not an option. They're going to do it, no problem, right? Growth zone is where they're a little nervous and option is possible. Failure is possible, right? And then panic zone is failure for sure. And so when a student is in the growth zone, I notice two things. They have a dependency on God and a reliance on team. They've prayed about it. They know God's with them, and they're also relying on some other team members to help them. When they're usually in the panic zone, they're usually all alone, thinking they could do it, but they really can't do it, right? And so the growth zone is the place where you really want to keep them. So I traditionally, when I'm working with students, I ask myself every day, are we in the comfort zone? Are we in the growth zone? Or have we reached the panic zone? Like, we do mission trips all the time here. And this is a good question to ask on every day on a missions trip, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is oftentimes panic zone. but you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and so,
for sure.
So I really want, like when a student leader runs up to me and it's like, Doug, we don't have what we need. And I'm like, okay, have we prayed about it? And two, who can help you? That's always my response because that's where I want them to be. And I want them not to have a false sense of, I want them to have confidence, but I don't want them to have a false sense of confidence. So I do want them to be able to humble themselves to say, I need other people and I need God. And I feel like that's a really good place. And so if you ask me what it is that I see youth workers missing, as I think they're missing this idea of creating a training and developing the leader before they just give them the role. And I also notice that they don't think through comfort zone, growth zone, panic zone.
Yeah, I think when I think back to things that I've done wrong, I think one of the things that I've often failed to do, and it's because I didn't think through it on my end first. I think I wasn't clear on the expectations. Like I might say, I want you to lead a game, and we'll talk through how to lead the game maybe, but I'm not clear of like, no, I want you to pick out the game. I want you to give me a list of what you need for the game. I want you to, and so I love what you're saying there, because I think it's easy to overlook those. You just get them in there and you're like, oh, they've got it. They're our leader. They're in charge of it. And then we just leave them to fail. And it almost has the opposite effect at that point, because we've crushed their confidence and embarrassed them in front of everybody.
Terribly. I can't tell you how many times youth workers have walked up to me at a conference and said, Doug, I've listened to you talk. And, I went back to the youth group and I put everybody in charge of something. We had 35 different roles. I put everybody in charge and I said, go. And it didn't work. It didn't work. Yeah, and I always say, no. That's not what I said. But believe you me, I get this a lot. What I said was principles plus experiences plus debriefing equals transformational leadership development. And you can't have one without the other, right? You can't have the experience and no principles, and you can't have principles and no experience. Otherwise, you'll never learn anything. So it's the combination of these things that make for a leadership development experience.
Yeah. Would you recommend, like if you're doing a more formal student leadership program, and are you inviting everybody to be a part of that, or are you kind of limiting that, capping that? Like, I guess that may depend on context. What is your thoughts on that?
I'm going to kind of blow up your question here. I just don't like leadership.
Okay. Yeah, blow it up.
I don't like student leadership teams. I don't like this fill out an application and somebody's in and somebody's out, and then mom and dad are angry. I don't like 12 kids on a team, and it's kind of like the Last Supper. We all sit around together and, because what ends up happening, to be totally honest with you, is we usually put juniors and seniors who are really busy and already overwhelmed, right? And they start the fall strong on the student leadership team, but by Christmas, we can't find them. They're applying to colleges, they're doing college visit, and it's a disaster. And typically on those teams, and I've observed a lot of teams, there's 3 students that do everything and the other 9 hide. And
it's like the worst group project ever.
Right. It's horrible. And it's usually just project based. Again, the doing side of leadership. Yeah. So I don't like it. So what I like is leadership labs. And this is what I mean by that. I mean that I'm just going to go and invite 1 to 3 students and say, hey, Tommy, I notice that God's at work in you, and you're you're a great communicator, and you've got some real compassion for your friends. And I'd love to invite you to work with me for 2 months and then lead a part of our fall retreat this year. And this is a big commitment. I'm going to need you to come to church a couple of times a week. I know you're a football player, and I know in the spring you don't have the same level of commitment that you do in the fall. So I think you might have the time for this, but I'd love for you to come join me. I'm going to be doing a bunch of discipleship with you. I'm going to do a bunch of training. And as soon as you lead this event, then what I'm going to do is we're going to meet one more time, debrief, and then we're done. Would you ever be interested in that? Tommy says, yeah, I'd be interested in that. I'm like, okay, let me talk to your parents. Let me make sure everybody's on the same page. We get on the same page with the parents, and then I'm going to run a leadership lab with Tommy. And I might grab Susie too. And Tommy and Susie don't know each other real well, but I'm going to grab Susie. I'm going to ask her to do that. And I'm going to bring them in, because when I bring 2 students in, this is where it gets fun in leadership development, because they're going to approach everything differently. And now they're going to have to be compassionate towards each other and learn how to interact with each other. So I'll do a lot of 1s, but I like 2s and 3s too, because then I can pick them and all that. So then I bring them in. I do we pick a role for them after we do some assessing. We pick a role for them, and then I create my training and I get them ready. And I'm discipling as well too. I'm talking through what's going on in their lives, and we get ready, and then they run the event. We do a big debrief. What are some things we did well? What are some things we would do differently? And what are some things that we learned that we want to say we learned these things as leaders? And then I'm going to bless them and send them on their way. And I might ask them to be in a leadership lab 2 years later, or I don't know what. But what I like about leadership labs is I can run a couple of them at a time. I can kind of pick and choose the students that I want to go after. And I can adjust the length of it based on their busy schedules, right? I can make it fit for them. And if I get a few other adults doing this at the same time, we could be running a leadership lab out of our worship team. We could be running a leadership lab out of the snack shack. We could be running a leadership lab in small groups, and maybe getting some of our students that are thinking about a calling in ministry, working with some of our junior hires. We could be doing a lot of things with leadership labs, and it's built more for the busy student. It's built around what adult volunteer feels like they're competent in that area, and it's short term and it's focused. And I really like, for leadership development, leadership labs versus leadership teams. That's where I'm at today.
Yeah. I have never, and I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling so bad now. I feel like there's a lot of things I've done wrong over 25 years of this thing. I have never, ever been able to successfully put together, to any degree of success on my part, a formalized student leadership team that accomplished much. Exactly. And I'm looking around and I'm seeing everybody else, and I'm like, maybe I just don't know how to do this. But so we tend to, what we've always kind of defaulted back to is, yeah, that's right. They're just talking about it. I usually end up finding some really key volunteers who are solid in their faith, high capacity folks, and then myself. And it almost becomes a little more of mentoring for us, where we're kind of pouring in, investing into some students, walking alongside them, trying to partner with parents in that. That feels to me, it's a little more organic at times and a little messy, to your point even earlier, but it has felt more successful.
Amen.
In accomplishing something meaningful. But yeah, for years, I keep looking around going, what the heck is wrong with me? Like, why can I not figure this out? It's not working. How do you, Doug,
can I just give a resource?
I was just going to ask, yeah, absolutely. Please.
So a few years ago, I wrote a free ebook on the LeaderTrex website. Just go to the search bar at the top right-hand corner and search Reimagine Student Leadership. And you can get a free copy of the ebook, where I wrote out how to do these leadership labs and how they work in comparison to student leadership teams. I'm not against student leadership teams. Boy, I think they would tar and feather me in some places if I said I was. I'm not.
Yeah,
I just think if you want to do more leadership development then I think leadership labs are a little more effective. Sorry, I just wanted to get that resource out there. So
no, you're good. I love that for sure. And I will link to that. I'll try to find that and link to that in the show notes as well, so folks can grab it. How do you do the leadership lab thing where you're approaching students and not be accused or kind of take on this, oh, Doug's playing favorites again because he's only pulling, his one or two kids. Like how do you, because I know that's a thing. Everybody in youth ministry, you've been a youth pastor for 2 months, you've been accused of favoritism.
Sermon on Sunday at church was on a James 2 on favoritism. I think that's the thing about leadership labs, is that you can easily pick the students that you would normally not pick. And I think that's a challenge for us, because it's easy to pick that kid who always shows up, who always wants to get a coffee with you and would hang out with you and you really enjoy them. So that's what I love about leadership labs. This is the way I think about them. And this is not the right way or wrong way. Just I like to combine students that don't know each other, which usually solves my problem here, right? Because favoritism is something that I do out of convenience, not something that I oftentimes do for any other. It's just easier, right? So I got to break that. So what I usually try to do with the leadership lab is grab one student I know well and one student I don't know, or students that don't know each other. And I also ask my adult volunteers, who do you think in your group, your small group, is got leadership potential, even if they're misbehaving, even if that behavior is negative behavior? I want to know their name, because I like the negative behavior kid as a leader. You mentioned this earlier, right? Like a lot of them are leading, but they're leading in a negative way, right? I love to sit down with that student and say, hey, I see God at work in you, and maybe in a way that you don't see. Like I see people following you. Now they're following you to the pit of hell, but they're still following you. So let me actually spend some time with you, maybe influencing them in a positive way. Would you ever be interested in that? Or I see God at work in you. You're an amazing communicator, or you actually solve problems for people. Now, you're using this creativity in a pretty negative way, but I still see God at work in you for this. Would you ever be interested in? And what I have found is that when I use that line, I see God at work in you. Would you ever be interested in getting into a deeper relationship with me for leadership development? I find that I've never had a student say to me, no, thank you. I've had a student every now and then say, timing wise, it might not work, but I find that students don't have enough people in their life telling them what they're great at. So one of the things that I've always loved to do, I have this tool called the leadership pathway, and it's how you develop a student into a leader. And what I love to do with that tool is start by telling students what I see their potential is in 10 years. Hey, I just want to tell you, I don't know if anybody's ever told you this, but if you were to get into a mentoring relationship with me on leadership development, I believe your potential in 10 years is this. And I find that students are like, wait a minute, what? How do you figure that? And then I begin to tell them what I see God doing in their life. And that's my favorite part of leadership development, by the way, if you can't tell by the excitement in my voice. But that part is where I get to really share with a student, I think you're awesome. I think you're super unique. I think you're super special. And the problem is that we tend to reserve that for the responsible kid. And if you can tell from my thinking, I'm not always in love with the responsible kid. The responsible kid is great. But the responsible kid usually already has 5 extracurricular activities. They already have 6 adults pouring into them. They got all these things. What about that student that doesn't have all that? Maybe they've got an addiction problem. Maybe they've got a behavioral issue. Maybe things at home are terrible. But I think that we have said to that student, leadership is not for you. And I think that's a huge mistake.
As you're saying that, and we've mentioned this a bunch about the responsible kid. I'm trying to think through scripture of someone that God used in a pretty major way that would have been the responsible kid. And everyone I'm thinking of was a mess. Like they were the troublemaker or unqualified or invisible.
David might
right?
be
And
our one that was a decent, responsible kid.
He's the one.
Responsible for the sheep.
He's the one. But he was like, his dad didn't even care enough to invite him to the party when they were picking the king, right? So it's just interesting. I think too, Doug, as I'm just thinking, I'm processing out loud here as we're talking, like I love taking the trouble kid because I've watched God do so many things in those kids over the years. And I do think that very few people speak into them. So when you're saying, hey, here's where I see you in 10 years, man, you're casting vision in that student's life that they are not yet able to see. But because you're further down the road in life and you've seen what God does in students, you're able to say that to them. It's the same thing I do with a volunteer. Like when I'm training folks on how to recruit volunteers, I would never say, hey, Doug, listen, we've got this 7th grade group of boys and, man, I just don't know what we're going to do. We can't really find anybody. I mean, they're a good group. They smell a little funny. But man, I just wonder if you'd be willing to come and just serve as their small group leader. Because if not, I don't know if we're even going to be able to have a group for these. Like, that's a terrible pitch, but what I am going to say to you is, Doug, man, I'd love to find a time to talk to you about our 7th grade boys because, man, I see such potential in these guys. I can see God already stirring in their heart and their life, something special. And man, what I really think is that God might be calling you to come alongside them and be a part of what he's going to do in their life. That's a very different pitch. And yet I think it's more helpful for the leader and for the student because I'm able to paint a picture of what the future looks like for them. And they're going to be way more excited. If anybody agrees to that first pitch, they're going to volunteer maybe a year if they make it the year. Yep. And they're out because they're just plugging a hole. That second pitch, man, they're in it. We've raised the sails, right? We've pointed to the horizon. They're in it to the end. And they're going to be aware of how God is working because I've put that on their radar. And I think what you're saying is similar for the students. And I love that.
Yeah. Sunday morning, I came out of church into the lobby and I saw Sean across the way, was in my first small group. He's 47 years old. I went over, I put my arm around him. And he's like, Doogie, how's it going today? And it was like we were back in the, and that's the kind of relationship you have, 38 years later. And, that's worth it. I mean, that's worth it, right? The long horizon. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, you've done this way longer than me. But and I'm 25 years in. It's pretty rare. Like every now and then, every few weeks, I get a message from a student that you don't expect. Yeah. Usually comes at a real good time, when you're just kind of really frustrated or bummed. And it's almost always the kid you don't expect.
Yeah.
Like, what the? I thought for sure you'd be in jail by now. What? Like, how is this a thing? And it's the kid that you didn't think was paying attention, or it was, I think it's the beauty of longevity and investing and being present and showing up. And so much of student ministry is just showing up, right? Just keep showing up.
I like it when they come around the second time. I like it when they screw up in their 20s and 30s, but then late 30s, they call you and say, hey, can I talk to you? I love it when they come around a second time.
Yeah. You're actually smarter than I gave you credit for. That's kind of what they're thinking. Like all those times, I wasn't sure you knew. You knew.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, Doug, if folks wanted to connect with you more and find out more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do that?
We have two main websites, leadertreks.org and deepdiscipleship.com. But if you I'm a youth guy. I'd love to talk youth ministry. And so one is if you call our main 1-800 number, I don't even know what it is, to be totally honest with you. You're going to talk to David or TJ, two youth workers. They're both 15 plus year youth guys who are now on our team, and they'll do anything to help you. They're not going to try to sell you anything. They'll do anything to help you. But you can also You can also reach out to me. I'm Doug at leadertrex.com. Pretty easy to know. And you can reach out to me, and I'd love to schedule a Zoom with you or talk or anything. So I do these refuel retreats around the country, kind of 3-day intensives on discipleship and leadership development. If you ever want to go deeper into these topics, that would be another great way. But just reach out to me, or I'm on Messenger a lot, Facebook Messenger. What's the one on Instagram? I don't really ever look at direct messages on Instagram. I'm old. But
the same.
But, yeah,
it's all connected now. It's all connected.
But I'd love to be able to talk with you, and I'd love to do it. And honestly, we're a nonprofit. We don't exist to sell you stuff. We're really trying to help youth workers make disciples and develop leaders, period.
Well, Doug, I've really enjoyed our time. I can't thank you enough for coming on. And I think everyone listening, it's evident your heart for students, student ministry, youth pastors, youth ministers, not just leadership, but obviously it's a huge component of it. And so, man, I just want to say thank you for all you're doing and all you've done. I mentioned to you before we jumped on to record how much I've personally benefited from what you've done and shared over the years from a distance. And so I'm just super thankful and grateful to have guys like you in the trenches there, kind of resourcing and equipping, encouraging churches and youth pastors. So, man, thanks a bunch. Thanks for jumping on today. I appreciate it. I know folks will follow up and connect. There's no doubt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Love talking youth ministry and leadership development.
All right, Doug, we'll catch you later. So how great is Doug, right? I mean, you hear him, you hear his heart for youth ministers, youth pastors, youth ministry, student leadership, just a wealth of knowledge in that guy. I appreciate, again, him and his time to come on the show. Make sure you head over to LeaderTrex and check out all of the things that they have there, all the helps. Their desire and heart, which I think you hear as he's talking, is really to come alongside you and help you in whatever way he can and encourage. And so they get lots of things there to help you, whether it's student leadership or otherwise. So make sure you head over there. Again, show notes today, thelongerhaul.com/episode 140. You'll find all the links and things there that you need. Make sure you are on the mailing list, the Facebook group, all the things that you say, right? Subscribe and follow, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, great episode today. I'm excited for the ones coming down the pipe. So make sure you are looking for those as they come your way, because we got some great things coming. Hey, thanks for all you do. Thanks for being a part of the Longer Haul. Stay at it. You're making a difference in the lives of your students. I know you are. And so be encouraged. Thrive where you are, for sure. And we will catch you later.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast. Before you go, hit that subscribe button to keep these conversations coming. For notes, resources, and to join our community, swing by thelongerhaul.com. Stay encouraged, keep making a difference, and remember, we're in this for the longer haul. Catch you on the next episode.